Previously on Transformers University, we discussed the importance of 1984, the cultural significance of the technology at the time, and the vibe in the air of the world, as well as the launch of the Transformers cartoon, as we get ready to discuss even more the history behind the Transformers. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Transformers University, the TFU.INFO podcast. I am your host, Anthony Brucali, and last time we talked about 1984, and we talked about the significance at the time, and we talked a lot about the cartoon, but I didn't really touch on the toys too much, and I didn't touch on the Marvel Comics at all, and both of those things would not have been as successful as they were if it wasn't for Marvel Comics and the folks there, and in particular, one person who set the ball rolling, and that would be former Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter. And in this episode of the show, I sit down with Jim Shooter to discuss the formation of the brand, the formation of the story behind Transformers, and a whole bunch of other things, including G.I. Joe and some other stuff at Marvel at the time. So I sat down with him in October of 2016 at New York Comic Con, and I am just not even going to tease this up anymore. So sit back, relax, and here is a TFU.INFO exclusive interview with Jim Shooter. All right, so I am here with former Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, who spent a lifetime working in comics. Started when you were 16? 13. Oh my goodness. And you've run the gamut. You've done DC, you were editor-in-chief of Marvel, you created Valiant Comics and Defiant
and Broadway Comics, and I worked for Dark Horse, and I've done a lot of other little things, and a lot of what they call commercial and industrial comics, things for advertising and promotion.
And licensed properties as well.
Well, yeah, yes. I did a lot of licensed properties, especially when I was at Marvel.
Okay. And so Jim is responsible for a lot of things we all grew up with and have come to love over the years. In particular, Jim is pivotal in the creation of the Transformers line as a comic book line and as a TV show. And so I know you've written about this on your website, so if you can just give us a little overview of the Mysterions story?
The Mysterions, yeah. Before there were Transformers, there was this property called Mysterions, which was, the rights were, it's a Japanese technology, and it was cars and trucks that turned into robots. And it was acquired, the rights were acquired by Knickerbocker Toys. Knickerbocker Toys, in those days, they made mostly plush toys, little stuffed animals and stuff. And I guess that wasn't going so well, and they were going to try to branch into boys' toys. Well, they went to DC Comics because they saw what Marvel did with G.I. Joe. But for some reason, they decided to try DC Comics first. And they saw our success with G.I. Joe, and they said, well, what we need is a comic book. So they went to DC Comics, and DC did a development and actually, I think, produced a comic book. I don't think it was ever printed. And then I got a call from the Knickerbocker people, and they said they'd like to talk to me. And they came over, and they told me that they'd gone to DC. They were very unhappy with what DC did. And they showed it to me. They said, well, what do you think? Oh, I mean, obviously, comics about toys are going to attract a younger audience. I mean, if you do it right, older readers will love them too. But, you have to realize that there's going to be some kids who buy this. This is all full of hells and dams and, half-naked women, and it just was so wrong, And also didn't make much sense to me. I just thought it was a bad job. So they said, well, can you do something with this? And I said, can you create like you did with G.I. Joe, can you develop stories around this? I said, yeah, sure, of course we can. So I started working on it. I did it myself. And then we had a couple conversations with them. Then there was supposed to be a meeting at Knickerbocker, which was way out in the middle of Jersey someplace. And so I went out there with the publisher, Mike Hobson, and we arrived in time for our meeting. And the place was strange. I mean, everything seemed a little chaotic. Everybody looked like they were on edge, and we didn't know what was going on. We ended up waiting something like 3 hours for our meeting, sitting there in the lobby and watching people going by and sort of looking nervous and stuff. Well, finally we have this meeting, and they were almost just going through the motions. I mean, I could tell. The only good thing that came out of the meeting was apparently our studio, our animation studio, had also been asked to do a development. I don't know how that happened. But so they were on a conference call, Dennis Marks from the studio, and they told him that no, they liked mine much better. So that was a little moral victory for me. But anyway, so we go home, and on the way home, Mike Hobson, a very business savvy guy, he says, I think they've been acquired by somebody. He said, because that's the kind of chaos you have on the day it's announced that someone is taking over the company. So okay, sure enough, Hasbro bought them. So then a month later, this guy named Bob Prupus, who's an executive at Hasbro, comes into my office, and Interport comes into my office, and he takes this car out of his bag, puts the car on my desk. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then he goes, watch this, flip, 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 it's a robot. Flip, 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 it's a car again. And I said, well, that's really cool. Why does it do that? He says, that's what we're here to find out. He said, you think you can do something with this? I said, yeah, I think I can. Now, I didn't do the same thing as with Mysterians, because I thought, no, that's different. This is not the same technology. Transformers is completely different technology. Two parallel technologies, I guess, going on at the same time in Japan. Hasbro acquired the Transformers, Knickerbocker acquired the Mysterians, and I think the reason Hasbro bought them was so that they wouldn't have any competition on the unfolding robot business.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's what I think. I don't know. I can't prove it.
So from there, then you write the treatment?
Well, the next thing that happened was in those days when we would get these development deals, they paid pretty well. And so I tried to pass them around to different guys so everybody would have a chance to, spend a weekend writing something and get paid a pretty good amount of money. And so it was kind of Denny O'Neill's turn, And I fed Denny his lines a little bit. I told him what I thought would be a good idea. And Denny, genius, Hall of Fame, great guy. But he really had kind of a disdain for toys. I mean, it was a toy comic. It wasn't as good as like Batman, And so what he did didn't work for me. So I threw his away. We kept a couple things that he named the spaceship Auntie, I think, and he named Optimus Prime. And other than that, it was all me. I rewrote it entirely. And and then we produced the comics, and the animation people produced the animation. Marvel Productions people produced the animation, and it took off. It was great.
Now, was the animation based off of your treatment?
Yes. They didn't know it was my treatment, which is why the animation was based off of it. What happened was we did G.I. Joe entirely just working with Hasbro, and then Hasbro had an ad agency called Griffin Bacall. Tom Griffin, Joe Bacall, and they were kind of worried that Marvel was becoming like a creative arm of Hasbro, and they wanted to get in between us and Hasbro. And so they, and I think there was some, old relationships there. I think one of those guys went to college with Hassenfeld or something. Anyway, so they created a production company called Sunbow, an executive production company. They didn't do anything, they just supervised. And so with Transformers, it ended up, Sunbow kept kind of getting in between us. And in fact, when the studio was given their marching orders to go through the animation, they were given a treatment, say it's based on this. And it was my treatment. But Sunbow had taken my cover page off and put their cover page on. Not a word changed. Okay. So a year later, I was out at the studio and talking about how we should coordinate more of the comics, Transformers comics, and the production animation. And they said, "Oh, we don't like your comics. They're stupid. Ours are. The animation's good. The comics are stupid." I said, "Well, I created this." And Lee Gunther, the production guy, starts yelling at me. No, you didn't. You're a liar. You had nothing to do with this. Sunbow created this. I said, no, Sunbow put their cover sheet on. I said, see, that's typed on my secretary's typewriter. These names of characters, some of them are named after my relatives. Sunbow didn't do this, right? Anyway, he would never believe me. But
which characters are named after your relatives?
I'm never one.
Oh.
But anyway, it just it was like there was this kind of friction between us and the studio, which lasted until Margaret Lesh took over at the studio, and then everything was swell. That was she made everybody work together, and it was great. But anyway, so that's how the Transformers came to be, and after I did the original treatment, I turned it over almost entirely to Bob Budianski, who was one of the editors, and he just took the ball and ran with it. I mean, except for that original treatment, which was the origin, which they used in the movie and everything. I mean, he came up with all the names of the characters and kind of all the developments after that. That's Bob Budianski. He had Sky Streak and Bumblebee, and that's all him. And he worked. We worked in the comics, but I mean, he also sort of kept working with Hasbro. And Hasbro, in spite of the fact that Sunbow had kind of elbowed their way in between us, they still came to see us. Especially about G.I. Joe. I mean, the guys up in the toys, the boys' toys at Hasbro, they just put their, dug their heels in, and they wanted to work with Larry Hama.
And Larry wrote all the.
They didn't want any of this interference from anybody else.
Larry wrote all the bios for the G.I. Joe toys, right? And then
Larry, he just like Bob did it, with Transformers, except Larry did even more. You want to hear it?
I'm sorry.
You want to hear the story?
Yeah.
All right. Well, the way G.I. Joe happened was president of Marvel, Jim Galton, was at a charity event with Irwin, I think. And so it actually met in the men's room. But anyway, they got talking, and Galton told me this, and telling each other what they did. And Hasselhoff said, "Oh, we make toys," and Galton says, "Oh, we have all these comic books." So they're talking about it, and Hasselhoff said that they wanted to reactivate the G.I. Joe trademark, but they weren't sure how to do it. They weren't sure exactly which way to go with it. And Galton said, "Well, we have all these creative geniuses. You should let us do it, do the development." And so anyway, there was a meeting called at their lawyer's office in Lower Manhattan. It was me, Jim Galton, the president of Marvel, a couple of Hasbro execs. I don't think Hasselhoff was there. And maybe somebody else, but I don't think it was even a Griffin Bacall guy. I think it was just other Hasbro people. And what they had was the name. They had G.I. Joe and the slogan, "A Real American Hero." That's it. That's all. They gave us this one slideshow of the logo. And so, and we started talking about it, and they said that they weren't even sure. They didn't know if they didn't want to make the big dolls. Maybe they wanted to make the smaller action figures. And we kind of talked them into, I kind of talked them into those 3 3/4, I think, inch action figures. And then the guy says to me, one of the guys says to me, he said, "We want a whole bunch of toys." He said, "What are we going to do? Like G.I. Joe, G.I. Fred, G.I. Steve?" I said, "No, G.I. Joe's the name of the unit. Call in G.I. Joe, I said, "Can't be war. Has to be anti-terrorist. Top secret." I said, "Make it the best sailors and the best Marines and the best soldiers and the best airmen." I said, a little secret organization. And they said, "Yeah, we like that. Yeah, that's good." By the way, I invented Delta Force 2 years before Reagan did. So anyway, they liked everything I said, and I was on a roll, and I was, they loved the slogan, "Call in G.I. Joe." And so anyway, I said, "Okay," and they said, "Great, give us a development, give us a, something on paper." So I went back to the office, I went straight to Larry Hama, and told him what happened. And he said, well, he had been working on a revival of Nick Fury and sort of the new Howling Commandos, which is going to be an anti-terrorist group, have a secret headquarters under the chaplain's house and the whole thing. And he said, I could take those ideas and use them for this. Is that okay? And I said, yes, sure. So that's what happened. And Larry wrote the original treatment. I rewrote it, but I didn't change anything. I just made it more dramatic. Larry did it like a Marvel plot, like just the facts. Mm-hmm. And I did it with football cliches, and they would not be denied, and all that stuff, because the toy guys love that. And so anyway, we pitched that. Hasbro loved it, and away we went. Larry did everything after that, except that Archie Goodwin created the Cobra Command and the Cobra Commandos and all that Cobra stuff. That was Archie. And then I did my little bit at the beginning. And after that, Larry did everything. And it got to the point where I didn't even go to the meetings anymore. It's just Larry. I didn't even bother. But like I said, the Hasbro toy guys, they just refused to have anybody get between them and Larry.
That's fantastic.
Because that's how good Larry is.
So actually, let's talk a little bit about that. So how did the process work? Now, it's funny you mentioned there's a difference between Marvel comic and the Sunbow cartoon, and actually for me growing up, that was one of the more interesting things, that this comic told a different story. It was the same story in its grounding, and then it changed. How did the process work then? Say, you said you went there to try to line things up a little, so I guess you noticed that at one point?
Of course we did. I mean, basically what happened was when we started the production studio, Marvel Productions, to do the animation, it was a joint venture with Toei, and so they hired David DePatie from the Patey Frailing to run it, and he brought in his production manager Lee Gunther, and neither of them had any. They hated comics. They thought the comics were stupid. Now Hasbro told them, "We like this for G.I. Joe. This is what we want," and so they were kind of stuck with us there, and they were stuck with us on Transformers too, except they didn't know it. So anyway, they started. I'll tell you how much they didn't like to be associated with the comics. They wouldn't use the Marvel logo. They created their own logo, just an M. They made out like they had nothing to do with Marvel. They really tried to distance themselves from Marvel because the two guys in charge didn't like comics. So then after a while. Because of various frictions and stuff like that, I guess, so maybe they were just getting older. We hired Margaret Lesh, who later became the head of Fox Children's, a tremendously brilliant woman. And she right away changed the Marvel logo, made it a Marvel logo. She had a sculpted figure of Spider-Man climbing up the outside wall. I mean, she was into it, And so then things got a lot better after that, it's just that was a major change. But in the meantime, before Margaret Lesh, there was a rather strained relationship, and they refused to try to coordinate with us or work with us at all, except that they made commercials that advertised the comics. The reason they did that is because there are a lot of regulations about commercials for toys. There are no regulations for commercials for comics. And so what they could do is make a thinly veiled toy commercial disguised as a comic book commercial. And so it was like 10 times more exciting than anyone else's commercials.
Yeah.
And because the other toy commercials, they have to show kids playing with the toys, and it had to be. They couldn't do like 100% animation. Well, we did.
Wow.
So that was like part of the deal there. So we had to work with them on that.
So were you involved in in any way in the production of the movie as well? The original.
Only that I wrote the original origin story. That's all. No, they never called me. In fact, I think most people never knew I had anything to do with it. Because of the Sunbow deception, and just because there were no credits on it. I had my credit on the comic book as editor-in-chief, but I never had a credit on any of the stuff that was done in the studio. So a few years ago, I think when the first live-action movie came out, USA Today did an article, a big feature article with pictures and everything, about Transformers, right?
Okay.
And they called me and they wanted to interview me.
Okay.
I didn't know about me,
Sometimes it's not really clear whether or not it's something
Apparently,
that's done.
Erwin Hassenfeld Jr., who worked at Hasbro during that time, remembered that I did it, right? And he told USA Today, "You got to interview this guy." And so it's the only place I ever got credit was in USA Today, and right here.
Have they credited you? And they haven't credited you yet in the films on the films now.
No, and they never. It's all right.
Does that fall under work for hire at this point?
Oh, yeah. Anything. Well, you know, if I was the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. If you're the employee of a company, that's the very definition of work for hire. So everything I did, they owned, and that's okay. I made that deal, and it was a good deal. I got paid well and enjoyed it, and you know, it was fine. I didn't mind at all that the company made money. My job to make the company money. You know, so I didn't care about that. I mean, it would have been nice if they'd actually given me a credit on some of that stuff, but that's all right. I don't care.
Speaking of creators then on the team, so how did you go about? So you said part of it was going about making sure you were taking care of your guys, taking care of your editors. It's funny because Ben Gentleman was sitting here before. He did an interview with Bob Budianski about 10 years ago, and Bob had mentioned that he came to him right before Thanksgiving weekend.
Yes. Hey, Bob.
Yeah. So what had happened there? He believes you were his third or fourth choice at that point.
No, not at all. No, Bob was terrific. Bob, you know, one of the hardest working men in show business, and really smart and really creative. And I'd always thought so. I mean, he was an assistant editor early on to, I think, for Jim Salicrup. It was great. I mean, he just did a terrific job. No, I think he was a good choice. And because who else am I going to get who's going to work on Thanksgiving weekend? You know, and you know, Bob says, he had to write the first story overnight, and he did, but I wrote the treatment. He wrote the first issue, and of course there's a lot of development that went on from where my treatment left off and where his work began. Like I said, after that it was all him. He did everything, characters, all of the developments that were done after that, created new characters. So terrific. He did a great job.
And so it's interesting because he started out as the editor of the book.
Right. I started with
And Bill Mantlo was the scripter for the first issue, and I know, you know, we all kind of know about what happened with Bill. I just want to know if you could tell me a little bit about Bill.
Well, Bill was he was a great idea man. He got trapped in a situation very frequently, especially before I got there and during the first couple of years. He was the guy that would write a script overnight. And in a way, he kind of liked it because we were stuck taking it, no matter what he wrote. You know, and in those days, it was all page rate. You got paid the same for 22 bad pages as you got for 22 good pages. And there was no royalties, there were no incentives or anything like that. So I mean, the fact is that he was dedicated enough to stay up all night and do it, and sometimes it wasn't all that great, frankly. But also, his redeeming features, and that's the things that he was better than almost anyone at, was he would create characters freely. You know, he never was precious about an idea, like he'd never have another idea, and that's how some guys are. They're so precious with their ideas. Not him, not Claremont either, and it was my job to create characters, so not me. So he was really good at the new characters and creating and developing new characters, and also he was willing to take on almost any challenge. I mean, you know, when Archie was editor-in-chief, and he had the human fly forced upon him. You know, who is he going to get? Bill would do it. You know, Bill had no, he'd accept any challenge. You know, he'd say, all right, I'll try to make that good. And you know, so you know, in some ways he was heroic, and we needed a guy, and there he was.
And then that's the scripting, or the plotting duties were first given to Ralph Macchio,
I guess.
And I don't know if
Bob was heavily involved in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Frank Springer was the artist at the beginning. And I don't know if you want to. I believe Frank's no longer with us. If you just tell me anything about him.
Frank was a great guy. He had done a lot of newspaper strip work. He really drew well. He was a good storyteller, and he was smart. And anything he worked on, he made creative contributions beyond just drawing the pictures. He would come up with little suggestions, and make notes in the margin or little bits of business that no one else would ever think of. And, you know, just clever stuff all the time. Good artist. Like a lot of guys, you know, a lot of older guys, they get to a point where they go out of fashion for a while. Kirby went out of fashion for a while, you know. People don't remember that, but like mid-60s, 76, 77, you know, Kirby's wasn't popular. And then people rediscovered him. You know, well, Frank was an older guy, so he was never, and it wasn't that he got unpopular, it was that he wasn't going to be a superstar because, you know, he didn't have the sort of young kid style, and but solid, and that's what we needed. We needed brilliant, solid storytelling, beautifully drawn, just not you know, not flashy, not image colors. You know, it's all right with me. I'll take that any day.
And then when Bob moved to being the full-time writer, Jim Owsley took over the book. And I'm actually a fan of his as Christopher Priest.
Yeah, no, he's a brilliant guy.
Now, I read somewhere that, I believe might have been on your site, you had to fire him at one point?
Oh yeah, he thanked me. Seriously. I mean, basically, when Jim started, I don't remember who his assistant was, but he had one of those assistants who was just a nut for detail and organization and stuff. And as long as he had the good assistant, you know, he was great because he could be the creative brain, he could be the right side of the brain, and the other guy could be the left side of the brain, and then things went wonderfully. And then I think that assistant went on to become an editor, and I wish I could remember who it was. But at any rate, then Jim had a couple assistants who were not as say organized. All right. And then things started to get late and get behind and stuff like that, and a couple of things sort of fell between the cracks creatively. You know, I was disappointed with them, and so finally, like I said, everything was late. It was kind of a mess. And I called him in. I said, Jim, is going to go always to work here. I said, because he writes so well. I said, but I got to fire you. You know, you can't do this job. And he said, thank you. Seriously, that's what he said. He said, thank you. He said, yeah, he said, I'm not, he said, this isn't what I wanted to do. He said, I just, you know, it was one thing when he had whoever it was, you know, but people like that, it might have been Bob Budianski for a moment, but people like that are rare, and it wasn't Bob. But the thing is, when he had an assistant that he had to train, and which is like typical. Usually, you have an assistant, you have to train them, right? Well, he had one that was already ready-made, and then after that, it just wasn't working out, and he knew it. And it just he didn't want the stress either, you know. He wanted to go and do creative things, which he did brilliantly. So I worked out perfectly.
Wow. I'm going to have to. He's here. I'm going to ask him later about the assistant.
Yeah, ask him who the assistant was, because he had one assistant who was like a real organizational nut, and then he had a couple good people, smart people, you know, creative people, but nobody who was going to be the left half of his brain, you know, and it just that's the trouble with comics. If you're an editor, you're like all at once. You're the director and the producer of the movie, and sometimes creative contributor to the movie. And, you know, if you don't have both of that director half of the brain and the producer half of the brain going, then you got a problem, you know. And some guys are better at one than the other, you know, and you know, they're better at one to get by on the other. And, you know, some guys can do it both, and some guys just, you know, they can't handle even Archie Goodwin, Hall of Fame, all-time great. If you ask, you know, a lot of these fans don't know because he didn't do a lot of like real high-profile regular comics. But if you asked, when he was live, if you would ask Mobius, you know, who's the greatest writer? He'd say Goodwin. You know, I mean, all of the elite cartoonists in the world respected him. You know, so he's a genius, Hall of Fame. Absolutely, totally disinterested in the business part of it. You know, was he smart? Of course he was smart. You know, he just couldn't get worked up to do the budget, you know. so you know, it's like actually when he worked at before me, he was the editor-in-chief actually, and I worked for him. And then later he came back for me, and worked for me doing Epic Illustrated. And the deal I made him is, I'll pave the road. You just do the creative. And it worked out really well. I did his budget, but he did everything else brilliantly. So that worked. Is that just how you different guys, different ways?
Yes. Do have a couple of quick questions. I was just wondering if you have any memories as far as either from the plot side or the production side, either one, of your time at Marvel working on Transformers. If there was anything after it was out that really stood out to you, a storyline or...
Well, the one thing that just really stood out to me is when Bill Sienkiewicz did those excellent painted covers. I just thought that was great. And also, all right, this sounds funny, but it was one of those books that just didn't have to worry about too much because Bob had it really under control, and there were so many other hot fires to run to. It was great to have a book that I could just count on and knew it was going to be good. And there was a lot of creativity going into it, a lot of talent working on it. So it's a comfort to me. It was really, one thing I didn't have to worry about exploding. And I thought they did some really, really good stories. I mean, to this day, people talk about some of those stories, and that's I'm talking back to 1985, 1986, right? Mm-hmm. So 32 years later, we're still talking about it. It must have been pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason we're sitting here. Also, I don't know if you remember, there was a miniseries that Marvel did called Transformers Universe.
Yes.
And it was just the character profiles,
yes,
similar to Marvel Universe entries.
Right. Yeah.
Just curious to, did those exist? Because those were basically the toy copy, I guess, or long form versions of what was on the toy. Were they?
Bob wrote most of it.
And what was the impetus? Like, do you remember when someone came to you with the idea?
We were doing the handbook of the Marvel Universe, and it was an institution. I mean, we would do every year. We'd do an updated version. We'd do special things. People loved it, and it was selling really well, and it was really a labor of love for Mark Roman, because he loved that sort of stuff. He loved explaining all the detail behind something, and he got a couple of good people like Elliot Brown to do all the technical drawings. And Elliot was a science genius, and so he could make it sound credible that there was a Blackbird plane that the X-Men were flying around in and stuff like that. It went. That was going so well. I'm not sure that we actually had a popular demand. I don't think people were getting a storm of letters asking for it, but it just seemed logical. So many Transformers, everyone with this little distinct features and little things it could do, and so why not? Yeah. Anyway,
and I think that's part of the beauty of Transformers and G.I. Joe in a way. They're basically superhero teams when you get down to it. When you get down to the bare bones.
Sure, and I think not traditional, but a lot of the same drama applies. It's a lot of the same DNA in there. So it's really all a matter of execution. When upstairs people who never opened a comic book, most of them, it wasn't like they were making educated decisions here, but as soon as something worked, they wanted to do lots more of that. When Star Wars was a hit, they wanted to do every movie. That's the trick, you do movies. I'm like, no, you do good ones. And so I had pushing them away with both hands, and I succeeded in not doing a lot of bad movies. I still ended up, being forced to do Dragon Slayer and a few other, things that, were just uninspiring. And, because there was pressure from upstairs, so do more movies, it makes money. Well, no. Same with toys. G.I. Joe was such a hit. Transformers was such a hit. Well, then every toy company, they're bringing every toy on Earth to me. We're doing Inhumanoids and Sectars. Again, I pushed some away. I succeeded in deflecting some of them, but some of them I wish we hadn't done. But it was kind of forced into it. We did the best we could. We always gave it a try. I ended up writing some of those treatments. Oh, P.S. When I wrote the treatments, I didn't pay myself. I was just part of the job. So, but when I ended up writing some treatments for toys because no one else wanted to. You know, it's like nobody was really interested. I said, well, I'll have to do it myself then. You know, and I did the best I could. You know, but some of them, you know, were bad ideas.
You know, on that note, do you feel, and I mean, it certainly was for me, do you feel that having the toy comic on the shelf next to the Captain America, the Spider-Man and such, drew people in, drew young folks into comics as an art form, as a craft?
Absolutely. I mean, the big four, as far as I'm concerned, at Marvel, G.I. Joe, because a lot of kids would walk right past a comic book rack because they didn't know who Iron Man was or care. But when they saw G.I. Joe there, they knew who G.I. Joe was and they wanted to get that book. And if they liked it, who knows? Maybe then they'd try Iron Man or Superman, or who cares? As long as we're getting them into comics, you know? And so G.I. Joe brought, I mean, can't tell you how many people give me issue 1 of G.I. Joe and say, this is what got me into comics, right? The other one is Transformers. Same thing. You know, they'd see Transformers, oh, gotta have it, you know, and then maybe later they'd go back and try Daredevil, you know, or whatever. So the other two are Secret Wars and Star Wars. You know, that really were starter books. A lot of people saw those heroes on the cover of Secret Wars #1. You gotta have it. So they bought that, and that got them into the other characters. Star Wars, was there anyone on Earth who didn't know what Star Wars was? It wasn't like we licensed Star Wars because we were short on ideas. We licensed Star Wars because there was going to be no one in the world who didn't know about it. And that's what when you license, by the way, that's what you license. You don't license the property. We can make our own properties. You license the exposure, okay? And so with those high exposure toys, yeah, they brought a lot of people into comics. They sold really well. And I think they got a lot of people started. We were doing you a favor, DC Comics. They got a lot of people reading Superman because they bought G.I. Joe. And so anyway, that's definitely the case then. Not so much now, I think. I think, you know, I don't know what happened to change the market, but I think there's all these movies, but the books don't sell. You know, like Avengers, when the Hulk was on TV, it became one of our top selling books. There's Avengers movies, but the Avengers is still not, you know, it's not. In my day, we averaged 300,000 copies an issue, average, across the line. Now you're lucky if you see, in any given month, if you see one book that sells 100,000. You know, so the things have changed. I don't know what all of what the difference is. I think some of it is that the comics should be better. They're not as entertaining as the movies, for sure.
Well, do you still read? Do you keep current on?
I don't. You know, what happens with me is that friends of mine will say, "Oh, you got to read this. Or you got to read that. Or, you know, don't read this." You know, and so I'll check out things here and there. I don't regularly read anything, but I do, and I read some independent stuff just to see what else is going on out there.
Do you check in on your own creations? Do you check in on Transformers? Do you check in on Valiant? Do you...
Not particularly. You know, it's like they're in other people's games now, so it would probably only upset me.
Does that go for the movies as well?
Oh, I've gone to the movies. I like the movies. The movies are pretty good. I mean, especially the Marvel movies have been pretty good. I'm not saying none of the DC movies were good. I like the two Batman. Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Yeah, like those. But the Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy just cracked me up. I love it. And it was most of them have been really pretty good. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, basically, when I was editor-in-chief of Marvel, comics were like in steep decline. The president of the company, when he hired me, he said, your job is to preside over the end of Marvel Comics. We're going to stop publishing comics. He said, try not to lose too much money in the way until I get us started in animation and children's books, which he got Marvel into both animation and children's books. And I told him, I said, you're wrong. I said the comics can be bigger than Disney. Ironically, I said that. And he said, I don't think so, but he's just trying to, keep the ship afloat until I can get us into other businesses. And I said, well, I want to start doing incentives and, paying better. He said, you can do anything you want as long as it either self-liquidates or it doesn't cost too much money. You know, he said, I'll go along with it. You know? And I said, so I'm gonna solve a royalty plan. He said, you mean we don't pay royalties? Because he was brand new too. And he had just come from the real world publishing, book publishing, and he just assumed that everything paid royalties. And I said, no, we don't. And so eventually, it took us a while to put the plan together, but we did, and you know, that was good.
So just one last thing. I just want to know, what are you working on these days?
I go to shows. As people say, what do you do for a living? I appear. And I do some commercial work here and there. I wrote a series of Christmas cards. I've done comics for. We created a character for Junior Achievement. I think we've done comics for. We did a comic book for the Kabbalah Center. Go figure. Anybody, you know, it's like they want to promote something or they want a custom comic or a premium promotion thing. We do that. Back in the old days, I did Cheezosaurus Rex for Kraft General Foods, Kenny Kid for Kentucky Fried Chicken. And, you know, I mean, whatever thing. But those come up periodically. So mostly, I go to shows and collect Social Security.
Wow, fantastic. All right, so I think that just about wraps us up.
Well, thanks for having me.
Jim, thank you so much for coming.
And that right there was the legendary Jim Shooter in an exclusive TFU.info interview. I am your host, Anthony Brucali, and you've been listening to Transformers University, a TFU.info podcast. I want to thank you for listening. I hope you like the show. I hope you like the site. And if you like the show, you like the site, you love the show, you love the site, then, my friend, please swing on over to TFU.info/help and check out all the ways you can help us out. It can be as simple as sending pictures. We'll have various links to various things you can do to help us maintain the site, grow the site, and maintain and grow this show. And if you want to help real quick, you want to help right now, go to www.tfu.info/Amazon, and that will take you to Amazon, and then anything you buy off of Amazon, they send us a couple pennies here and there, but it adds up, and it adds up to help the site and help the show. So I'm going to wrap it up here, and we'll see you next time on Transformers University. See you.